So it's so good to see you again, and congratulations.
Good to see you.
I know, congratulations on the baby.
Thanks.
That's wonderful. That's such good news, you know. And then, you're getting these other kinds of artistic and intellectual babies birthing all the time. You're really busy and getting a lot done. Congratulations.
How many babies I can take care of.
Yes,
at once.
right. That's really good. It's good. It's really good to see you again, and welcome. Welcome very much to Conversation. A pleasure to welcome to the program Douglas Rushkoff. He's been a guest a couple of times in the past, and it's really a great pleasure to welcome him here. I'm going to say right at the outset to congratulate he and his lovely wife on the fact that they are just about to have delivered to them their first child, and it's in the period just as this program is going to air. Congratulations to you and your wife on that. That's a major event, and I really am happy for you in that regard. But I wonder if maybe you could, we're going to want to talk about some of the media things. You're a professor of media studies and so forth at NYU, and you had a couple, I guess, major PBS documentaries you made about the media. You've been interested in that. But maybe we could talk about the media and that sort of thing. We'll show a little clip from The Persuaders, the most recent thing that you did for the PBS Frontline series. But maybe you could share some of your own background if you could, and then we could talk about some of the books you've written on and some of your concerns about understanding media and that sort of thing, if you would.
Yeah, I mean, I was originally interested in theater, and that was my background as a kid, and then really through college. So I went to Princeton doing theater, went out to California Institute of the Arts, worked on theater there. Then I got interested in film. See, this was all in the 70s and 80s before we really had multimedia like we know it today, or an internet or anything like that.
You were interested in an actor and or writer or
director? Actually.
Okay, right.
Director and some writing, but I was really more interested in what are these people doing in a room?
Right.
Sitting, half of them out in there and half of them up on a stage pretending like this thing is going on.
Yeah, right.
And what's happening here.
It is an interesting process.
So I was interested in that, and or what keeps people captivated, all sitting staring at this wall of light in a movie house. You know, what's going on there.
Big difference between theater and movie, you think? Or
yeah, more than I thought there was. More than I thought. You know, it's funny, they were just shooting War of the Worlds on my street this week, you know, with Tom Cruise and Steven Spielberg there, and it
you mean
brought
the
me
Mercury
back.
Theater thing? I
guess an adaptation of H.G. Wells' story.
Okay.
And I was looking at the giant set, and I was remembering why I stopped when I was doing film and went from film to writing. It's because film is actually in many ways, a very dead process. You take a script that has infinite possibilities, you take these live actors and you have them pose for 10 seconds at a time and move a whole bunch of machinery around.
To get the eye blink right or something.
And I found it, I found that process, it just wasn't suited to my temperament, which was much more about sort of living events and conversations, sort of like what you do.
Well, theater more like if you're in theater, it's in real time. You go through, you start, you can't just stop. And
certainly, right up to the first performance, it feels like a living, changing thing. And
I think it does.
Then you do the same thing every night. If you
my daughter's a theater director. She's involved. She's always more interested in theater because it is that spontaneous. You start, that's it. Whereas the movies all stop and go. And
Although I do, on some level, pity the actor after opening night who has to repeat the performance then. Time and time again, when does it die down?
I've never understood how they can do that and how they, as Stanislavski, call upon their emotional something to convey something that is not really real to them in terms of the way they're experiencing the world and their reality. It's tricky.
So then, I got more interested in the reader's experience, the user's experience, and depending on what medium we're in. So I started writing books. And for me, the challenge was to find things that people hadn't written about or hadn't written about well, and try to get it to conform to the real linear format of a book. So I wrote this book called Cyberia, which was about cyber culture and rave culture and psychedelic experiences and fantasy role-playing games, all of these very non-linear experiences, and trying to get them down into words. I remember Timothy Leary was reading my early books, and he would say, "Why are you writing it like this? You got to have pictures and sections and that." And I was like, "Yeah, but then it's not a book. What I'm trying to do actually is the technique of getting it all down." So it comes out like,
Was it get to be like Joyce, maybe, or like Faulkner, or some sort of stream of consciousness? How does one do that? Poetic? Putting it down, because Mcluhan used to say the phonetic alphabet is a linear procedure. I don't know.
It is linear,
but is it the way of writing or poetic?
Well, I thought the way I tried to do it was through sort of conveying lateral thinking.
Okay.
Comparing
Lateral thinking.
Comparing things that hadn't been compared before.
Mm-hmm.
So, take the experience of a cartographer and a surfer and try to show how are they alike and how are they different. How is a surfer like a chaos mathematician?
Right.
How is a chaos mathematician like a fantasy role player?
Right. Okay.
And then sort of conveying that way.
Pattern recognition, do you think?
Yeah,
is
that's
it
what
part
I'm
of
trying.
parallel processing?
Yeah,
maybe in cyber
that's what
terms?
I'm trying to teach. Really, is pattern recognition, because people are confronting a very disorienting landscape. A landscape that's as disorienting to them as a psychedelic trip was to people in the 60s. What are we stepping into? How do we negotiate it? What are our children doing? What are our careers going to be like? What is work like? What is money like? What is going on here?
With this electronic environment in which is enveloping all of us.
Right.
So.
And then, of course, the joke is the question's the same as we've been asking for the last 5,000 years.
You think, yeah.
It's just the electronic environment now gives us a new excuse to ask this question, but we're still the same little consciousnesses swimming around trying to figure out what is going on.
Don't want to put too fine a point on it. Why 5,000 years rather than 200,000 years that the species has been here? 5,000 years was...
sort of the beginning of what you could call storytelling.
Oh, storytelling.
The beginning, it's the first evidence I can really find of people using narratives to understand what's going on. People
and what do
really
we relate
making
that
stories.
to out of the record? I know you got one book, if you don't mind me showing it.
Oh, sure.
Had really selling well. It's called Nothing Sacred. Is that the title? What's the subtitle?
The Truth About Judaism.
All right, fine, because Judaism goes back, apparently, 5,000 years or
or
right?
so,
I don't know
or less, depending on who you talk to.
Right.
The impulse.
700 and something this is. Or
at
something.
least that's supposed to be, from back when Abraham decided, unlike his fellow man, not to sacrifice his firstborn son to the god Malach, but rather...
At the last moment, but he was he went a long way down that line,
Oh,
didn't
he did.
That's
he
a,
did.
There's a morality play
We all
in there.
did.
Yeah.
And, Jews went back to do that time and time again through the centuries. There's the altars on which children were sacrificed. It's apparently it's very tempting for people in times of strife to sacrifice their firstborn children to the
thinking
gods.
that can help make things right or something.
Somehow, yeah.
Sort of transmogrified into animal sacrifice. That human sacrifice seems to have
exactly.
gone. Although the Aztecs
sacrifice,
did that, didn't they? The Aztecs
well,
really
it depends. The evidence goes both ways sometimes.
Yeah.
Or circumcision was another. Give God a piece of foreskin. He'll be satisfied with that.
Yeah. But you said 5,000 years. You seem to put some sort of a link at 5,000 years as a link back in time to the time in which we find ourselves now, rather than going back and try to incorporate Paleolithic man and that 195,000 year that was there.
Well, it's because I was going to tell a Jewish story there.
Okay, good enough.
But really, you could go back on another level. You'd go back, really just to the invention of the alphabet, which was the beginning of our first sort of symbolic system through which we would understand our world. The beginning of what Mcluhan calls as kind of a schizophrenia, but the beginning of abstraction. First it was the alphabet, then it was the Renaissance and the invention of the individual, and now we have cyberspace, which seems to embody this, this thought realm, this other symbolic
So that'd
realm.
go back to about 1500 or something, and we would go. That would be the loop back then. If we're sitting here, we're sitting in the year 2004 with your baby about to be born. Into 2005, big monumental moment. And so, but we go back and we go back in loops. We go back to the period that begins to close quotes, as it were, bookends the time in which we find ourselves.
It's hard to know how far
back can we go and
well,
understand the media and the tools and so
funny.
forth.
It's like
what do we mean by
we
media?
want to know how big a moment this is. And you'll have some people saying, "Oh, this is as big as the invention of the wheel." And other people saying this is as big as the invention of the printing press. Another one saying this is as big as the invention of text.
Electricity.
Or the invention
the electric
of
age,
oral culture. And that's because they're trying to create they're trying to create a bookend and a story, as if that's the way it works, beginning, middle, end. And I don't think it really does. I think that there's resonances, there's resonance points.
Everything is resonance in the universe. I think Superstring seems to tell us that.
Sure, and at a lot of times you can look back at moments and say, oh, that moment really resonates with this one. I don't know if it's so important to say, for us in America now, this moment is as big as that, or this is going back to the Crusades moment, because then you can end up getting into an interesting trap then of feeling like things then are somehow predetermined, or that now is the time that Islam is going to fight back against us, or now is the time that this is that. I mean, I mean, I like to look at history as a succession of renaissances, as moments when really old ideas, like you're saying, can be rebirthed in a new context. So rather than it being a bookend, it's like, yeah, okay, so in the Renaissance, the original Renaissance, some Greek ideas were reborn, and in our moment now, some ideas that got repressed during the Greek Renaissance, certain ideas of femininity and certain kind of great, pagan, holistic ideas ended up getting repressed, and those are getting, reborn a little bit, or hopefully integrated into a broader picture.
With all due respect, you say Renaissance. That means rebirth, right?
Right.
Now, what was the rebirth of the transformation between, let's just say, not say Australopithecine, but let's say Homo habilis or Homo erectus, that was the immediate precursor to Homo sapiens sapiens, of which we are. That wasn't a rebirth, that was a birth into something kind of new in terms of the evolution of consciousness. Not a renaissance or a rediscovery of what had gone before, but had a new beginning. Do you think we're maybe at that point, possibly, in terms of the evolution of universal consciousness, if we dare bring up such a concept? Or do you understand what I'm saying?
The emergence,
rather than recapitulating history.
But the emergence of a unique human consciousness, if that's what you want to call kind of
200,000 years ago, or apparently
even the
appeared.
emergence of that is a recapitulation of something else.
You think so? Goes back to the beginning of the
another
Big Bang
consciousness of something else.
But
so it always but that's it. I mean, you can spin out, you can spin out and sort of
Well, let me ask you another term, young man,
wonder.
if I may then. If I ask you another term, because you're a student of media. What do you mean when you say media? Now, a lot of people talk about media, they talk about electronic, television, print, that sort of thing. Is media including the first stone tool? Our media...
media is everything.
What is the media?
I mean, finally, and that's why it's
You know what I mean?
Call yourself a media theorist, you get to be an everything theorist.
Yeah, it's a great thing. You're a theorist of everything. That's great.
Everything between, my consciousness and yours. Like, where do you start?
Well, that's what I was trying to get at.
What's not media? You go all the way back to who you are, and all the way back to my DNA, right? Which is what makes me me. But what's less a medium or more a medium than DNA? DNA is a pure medium because it's taking, history and communicating all the way through the future.
It is amazing. Do you know that there are 100 trillion cells in the human organism? 100 trillion. That's a lot. Yeah. That's a bunch. That's what Wade tells us. And it's all overlain with the DNA. It's like some sort of a bloody miracle. It makes the internet look like a cakewalk. I mean, the complexity of just a human organism that we take for granted.
Right,
but there is the design there.
And
I wonder,
how many atoms are in, certain molecules?
Yeah, right.
How many molecules are in a cell?
And the computing's going to the molecular level with carbon-60, that kind of thing. We're going through an exponential kind of development of... what I'm trying to get at is that we may be closing quotes. Is it possible that we're closing quotes or can begin to see the birthing or we're closing quotes on what has been the human experience? So the loop back is not just back to the printing press.
Yeah, but
or is
the process that you're involved in is ultimately self-defeating.
Okay.
Because what you're attempting to do, and it's a noble effort.
You mean with this question?
Yeah, and with this line of thought is you're attempting to orient, right? And you're attempting to orient in a kind of absolute way. And I understand that, and it's something I would do. Were I tripping or something? It's like, well, where are we? Where are we cosmically? What level?
What's
are we
it all
at?
about, Alfie?
Yeah. And it's like, where are we cosmically in terms of the scale? How far? How many levels down does it go? Down to atoms and little things?
Right.
How many levels out? When I'm the fingernail in the giant of the thing. Or historically, where does it go that way? And I'm thinking that pursuit in itself is less valuable than looking at it a bit more musically.
Okay.
In other words, looking at it more in terms of resonances. So it's like, well, this moment reminds me of that moment. This moment reminds me of this thing. The fact that human beings are becoming conscious of their organismic relationship to one another reminds me of cells coming into a single
organism. Right. Well, Lovelock's trying to do that,
isn't
he?
He is, but it doesn't mean to say the moment that we're in now is the same as the moment where... in other words,
hardly,
it doesn't have to be that
Mr. Rushkoff, hardly am I saying it's the same as. I'm trying not to recapitulate history, but we're coming to a brand new kind of opening that is...
We always are coming to a brand new opening.
You think so, really?
I think that's the thing.
Yeah, maybe. Well,
I think it is. It's like, you're at a different part of the trip, but it's like, it is like saying, okay, get ready. This is the best.
Yeah,
best
right.
You know, and that's beautiful. You know, that's beautiful. Yeah. But
this is the peak experience,
exactly,
right? Yeah,
This is it. Or was
well,
it?
It may be after all these millennia.
Or it may have been. You know, when you were hanging with the merry pranksters and Ken Kesey and Stuart Brand, and now I'm just living in the aftershock, getting to write about it.
Yeah.
You know?
No, but
or
I'm thinking
it might be what my kid gets to do.
Yeah, but you're a media study, so it does include not only just the media by which we extend our consciousness and so forth, as Mr. Mcluhan wrote about Joyce and so forth, that kind, not just that, but it's also the whole experience of extending our conscious capability and making the world different in a sense, like with the first hand tools and so forth. So it may be that we're transcending. We now reached a point where the weaponry that exists, apparently, Mr. Joshua Lederberg will tell us that the weaponry that if it were to be unleashed in some, crazy spasm of hatred or something, apparently it means we've reached a point finally where we could, if it's unleashed, we can see with science that we would destroy the whole species.
Here you go, though.
Destroy the whole species.
The problem
that's
is...
something existentially new.
And that's because people are so desperate for a marker that they can believe in. Right? For a true moment that they could say, this is it. That they would rather, in a certain way, blow up 90% of the planet to get their bearings than to accept that you don't know. In other words, if you don't have cataclysm, if you don't have Armageddon, then you'll never know. For example, I spent all this time studying Renaissance, thinking Renaissance was really cool. And the more I studied the Renaissance, the more I started going, maybe it wasn't really the Renaissance, but it was kind of the Enlightenment that I'm really more interested in.
The Scottish
guys
Enlightenment.
And Spinoza and all these people who talked about Hume and individuals and autonomy. So I was going, well, is it the Renaissance or is it the Enlightenment? And I went, well, wait a minute. There's this Baroque thing that happens in between.
Yeah, that's when they started music notation.
Now maybe that's the interesting one, and they started framing everything and wearing wigs and getting meta-conscious and all that.
And musical notation.
And musical notation and calculus even.
With Bach.
And then you go, well, it doesn't matter. The fact is, it's a continuum. There's great moments that are happening in each one. And if we can resist the temptation to put the flag in and go, it's now. Life, you don't change your life like that. You don't wake up and today's the first day of the rest of my life, and now I'm going to have total. That's really the way transformation happens, is you give up. You know what I mean?
Well, I'm not so sure. Evolutionarily, they have a thing called punctuated equilibrium, where things happen all at once, the emergence of a species.
Yeah, but they're arguing that one, too. There's the moment that happens.
They can argue everything,
but what moment does it really, how do you finally get down to which, is it that's the generation that the horn came out and bingo?
Well, it might, let me ask you another question. Do you think, just a little another thing we can consider, is, we got the evolution of consciousness in a certain sense, that it comes in that. Do you think the evolution of, that biological evolutionary purpose, biological evolutionary development on this planet of which we're a part and we represent an intelligent extension of and so forth. Bucky Fuller used to say it was to move across entropy and bring conscious pattern to the process of which we're a part. Do you think there's a purpose to being in the universe, or is it all chance and necessity? And what do we deal with the ultimate ontologic questions of mystery and how much can be known?
Well, I think, this goes back to what I always thought Judaism was about.
Yeah, okay, good. Back to your book.
Make purpose.
Okay.
I think the trap for people is to need to believe that we were put here by a creator with intention. Because in a sense it's really disempowering. I would much rather people work towards meaning rather than search out what is the intrinsic meaning. There may be no intrinsic meaning. We may just be fungus on a rock hurling through cold and meaningless space.
A lot of people think that.
But that
it's chance and necessity.
But that doesn't mean that there's forever no meaning. What it means to me is human beings can make meaning. We are the music makers.
Man makes himself. Yeah.
Well, we can
Gordon
make
Child
meaning.
wrote.
We can create. We can create ethics. We can develop morality. That just because we weren't put here, just because plankton don't behave ethically, doesn't mean that we can't. We can develop that. So is there? I look at it in the most optimistic way. I'm an optimist.
You are optimistic, right?
Yeah.
It doesn't concern you that we may be, if we reach out, Mr. Carl Sagan and so forth, still looking SETI. They're still looking for examples of life out there in the universe, and probability says it's got to be there.
Right.
There's got to be there, but we haven't done it yet. We're it here in the world. And we reach a point, young man, where we reach the point where if we go along this line and we throw off these weapons and all the hatreds and everything, we can apparently, Jonathan Shell writes so poignantly on that in Fate of the Earth, that we apparently now reach the point where after 200,000 years of battling and whatnot, we can destroy the whole species.
Right.
That's an existential kind of thing. We couldn't do in the Second World War.
No, and
that's a marker for why this might be
probability tells us that we will do that.
Well, wait a minute. That's a little bit. That's not like saying we're going to destroy the tribe in the other village or something. It's a marker.
Right. We could end human life on Earth.
Yeah, but now think about it. Did you read? Have you read Fate of the Earth? Have you read that? It's poetic. Those chapters where he's facing into the abyss. Can't destroy life, but we can destroy our life.
Yeah.
Now, I guess I'm trying to make a point for saying I think it might be that this is a time of not quantitative transformation, a coming qualitative transformation in the evolution of events on this planet and perhaps in the cosmos.
Yeah,
now, people have been saying that probably for a long time, but it might really be awakening time.
Yeah, but the way we get to have that, it's like saying, you know, here I am on the edge of my windowsill.
Here we are. The collective whole.
Here we are on the edge of a windowsill, about to jump out. In other words, do we need to take things, and maybe we do, in other words, in order to experience consciousness, in order to experience our aliveness, do we need to bring ourselves to the brink of suicide?
Well,
maybe.
We seem to be there.
That's what we're doing. That's what we're doing. But it doesn't mean that it's an intrinsically meaningful moment. It means that we've created, created a crisis.
Absolutely, yeah. But we were
probably why we're here.
Think about it, Douglas. We were protected.
Moment.
We were protected in our impotence, and we couldn't kill it. We couldn't kill ourselves all off.
Only as individuals.
In the Second World War,
we could only do it as individuals.
No,
now
you could never get everybody. Yeah, it can be done at the behest of one person.
Right.
Now, to set off a linking of things that have been developed, and these extensions of our consciousness, many of which are destructive, and so forth, and you got the old hatreds in that, and we couldn't do that in the Second World War. We couldn't do that. We crossed that line probably about 1970 or so, that we got the point where the weapons system.
And we're going to have more and more of those abilities.
Okay, now we got this tremendous godlike capability that we have, that is the extension of our technology and media in that
where
full
each
sense.
person becomes a high leverage point in a giant system.
Right. So the question is, if we reach that point in a destructive scenario in a certain sense, is there an adverse side? Is there an adverse transformation to this technology, which is, in a positive sense, is going to make it possible for us, James Joyce said, history is a nightmare from which I'm attempting to awaken. Are we at a point where we might be awakening to a realization of a capability that our historically inherited institutions are not permitting us to realize in terms of a liberation of the humanity within ecological context? Is it a time of sort of awakening now to something new that is not a recapitulation or a renaissance of what has gone before?
Oh, compassion has been around a long time
Not just compassion. Well, okay,
really, that is what we're talking about.
No, not really. I think you're talking about
it's a Christ consciousness or a Buddha consciousness on a mass scale.
Well, I'm not sure I'm talking just Buddha consciousness. You're talking about not just ethics, or it would be nice or something like that. It's in terms of just cold-hearted efficiency. It's so inefficient to allow the inappropriate kind of application of human systems and so forth that don't allow so many people to participate in some sort of a maximal way.
I don't think the phase transition is as dramatic and noticeable as we might think.
Oh, shucks. It'd make for a better scene, wouldn't it?
It would make for a better scene, but I think the quest for that sort of bottleneck pre-orgasmic tightness before the explosion, birthing is itself problematic.
It's problematic. Okay. All right. Well, it was just a couple of questions to sort of set the tone. We're going to try to set the tone of some sort of thing, and you want to talk about things. Listen, talk some about all the books you've been talking. The first book you did was Cyber something, and you've written how many books now?
10.
10
or 11,
books, you're
depending
really
on how
putting
you
them out.
count.
Some of it's fiction. Do you go over into
Couple of
science
fiction.
fiction and stuff like that?
Yeah, 2 novels, yeah.
Right. And then you've also gotten into this work with the PBS, right?
Mm-hmm.
Talk about that a little bit. You're doing television production as well as teaching at NYU and that sort of thing. But talk a little bit about some of those things, specific projects that are part of the ongoing life of Douglas Rushkoff.
Well, I wrote a bunch of books just trying to help make people more aware.
Right.
And that's an easy way to say it. And a little more media literate.
Yeah, okay.
In other words, I and some others of your guests would actually criticize this as perpetuating the schizophrenia.
All right.
But I believe
keep it going.
that if people become more aware of the way media works, of the way media is assembled, of the way stories are being told, and if they become capable storytellers themselves, that they will feel more in charge of the unfolding of the reality they're living in than just being passive recipients of a story.
Big change.
Yeah. So I'm still
to be devoutly desired.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think so too.
And I'm still there. I still believe in that. I mean, and there's some, you know, like your friend Bob Dobbs, who comes on here sometimes, really believes that's kind of a diluted notion of the Enlightenment. In other words, that literacy itself is the schizophrenia, that it is the problem, and there's a more tribal, real connectedness.
And electronic, you know, coming off the Gutenberg Galaxy, Mcluhan's reading.
So, you know, so I could be wrong, but I'm a Jew. And
you've written about the Judaic
thing. I've written
thing.
about Judaism. So, and I do believe that, you know, Judaism basically is an open source proposition.
Okay,
what
good
Judaism
to talk.
says is the same thing that our open source programmers tell us, which is rather than just accepting what Microsoft hands down and using the software that we're given, we're going to learn the codes, we're going to learn how software is put together, and decide on the applications that we want.
Now, how do you make
write it?
All right, how do you, we go back to and we go back to the beginning of Abraham and that. How do you make the analogy between the Judaic experience and the open source?
Well, Judaism
Judaism
arose out of the 22-letter alphabet.
Okay, talk about it.
In the old days, people had hieroglyphics.
Yeah, okay, you're right.
Hieroglyph literally means priestly writing.
All right, does it?
It was the priests who wrote it. Hiero is the priest, and glyph is the writing.
Very good, yeah.
Because you had to be a priest or a king to learn the 5,000, 10,000 characters that represented everything.
And they were like ideographs, weren't they? Yeah, it was sort of like Chinese.
So in one sense, they're easier to understand, but on another sense, you've got to learn a zillion of them. So only the elite could learn it. 22-letter alphabet, although it was encoded, essentially created 22 forms that could represent the sounds.
Now, what alphabet? Are we talking Hebrew alphabet or are we talking phonetic alphabet?
Well,
or Phoenician?
Hebrew. Really.
Hebrew.
22,
okay.
You know,
okay.
22 or, you know, Aramaic.
Yeah.
But, you know, the M sound was for Mayim. Was you know, Aleph was the bull, and it was shaped like a bull. Bayit meant house. It was shaped like a house. And that was how you could remember A, Ba. C was the camel. D was what was Dalet? I forgot.
Afraid I don't know.
Anyway, each one was a tiny symbol, so you could remember what the sound was.
Yeah.
With 22 letters now, everyone can be literate. There's this thing God says to Abraham at the beginning of the Bible. He says, "You will be a nation of priests." And people for years have always thought, "Oh, this meant Jews will wear little yarmulkes and basically be priests of the world." And I never thought it meant that. I thought what it meant was you will be a nation of priests, people who can read and write. You will be the first literate nation. Because if you are literate, if you can write, you will no longer need to accept the story passively. Now you can write the story yourselves. So where people before Abraham's God basically had to passively accept whatever the gods gave. There was no human intervention in affairs. The calendar was circular. Everything was the same. The gods reigned or they didn't. They gave you fertility or they didn't. You just sacrificed things and hoped for the best. The invention of Judaism was meant as the invention of activism, the invention of human interference in nature.
Which is intrinsic to the nature of the human capability to affect the environment.
Yes, but it was illegal. It was against the rules. It's why they had to leave Egypt, because it was people saying humans make a difference. There's such a thing as progress. The calendar changed from circular to linear because now we can measure progress. So human beings are taking an active role in the unfolding of reality.
Yeah, that's a big issue.
That's a big issue, but we keep forgetting that.
Yeah,
I mean, so kings and popes and leaders of all kinds want us to forget that we are in charge of what's going on here.
Set me straight now, in a way. They didn't want to let the poets into the Republic in Greece time, because they said it was Homer's time, and they said that if they have it written down, it will create forgetfulness in the learner's mind, and they didn't want to allow the poet into the Republic. And the idea they're coming out of an oral tradition and a sort of thing around the campfire, which probably been there for a few 100,000 years, where people would be shamans, would be telling stories in a multi-sensory kind of way.
And we did lose a lot. I mean, Walter Ong wrote about this brilliantly.
Yes.
Moving from oral to literate culture.
Right.
Because in oral culture, if you're going to lie, you got to lie to my face.
Yeah, right.
In literate culture, can write it down here.
And it's also
and
multi-sensory. It's multi-sensory, and it's stringing things out in a it's stringing things out linearly in a way. Like it takes 8 pages for who wrote Hawaii? The guy who wrote Hawaii. Michener. He writes it in a great literary description of what, if you're standing in that place, you would experience it multi-sensorily all at once. The bird in the sky, the sun, and that sort of thing.
And the downside, and Mcluhan talked about this too,
yes, he did.
is abstraction. Once you're writing things, now you're dealing with an abstract symbol system.
That's right.
And when you're dealing with an abstract symbol system, it can be strange.
Yeah, and you're also stringing things out linearly, and it's also associating a linear, strung-out specialization, perhaps, with rationality.
Right. At the same time, I mean, these religions,
rather than the
Judaism,
all-at-once electronic world that we're getting back to, so James Joyce presaged.
But the idea, what was believed at the time, was that if you keep it text only, and the Jews were this way, and Islam is this way, keep it text only, people won't be as easily coerced. They won't be as easily persuaded, because if everybody's literate and everyone can write, then everyone will know this is not set in stone.
Right.
You know, the only way a literate culture works is if, even Torah was written, the text is supposed to look like fire.
Yeah.
That it's not set in stone.
It's beautiful.
Always, and Talmud, you have a little bit written here, then someone else writes a footnote around that, someone else writes a footnote around that. The idea, if you're keeping it in text, is that anyone can amend the text.
Right, good idea.
Anyone can footnote
like open source.
Right, it
sounds like open source, doesn't it?
Source. If you understand the codes by which it is written, and understand that it is not a mysterious thing set up by some crazy people in Redmond or by some special priests in Jerusalem,
and you can have input.
Are people just like you, and you can come in and you can change it, and if your code is better, if your story works better, if your rules work better, then they will be adopted.
Help me here, because you understand code better than I do. We got closed source, and then we got open source, a big movement, and it's coming out, and it's a thing where the code, which makes some software program, which is becoming very important to the operation of the technological extensions of our consciousness and so forth that exist, is very important. But it's a way in which people who would be able to access the code behind this program, let's say, and then they could make suggestions as to change, but they can't on their own change something that somebody's already done, can they? Or how does that open code source code work, and what's the significance of it?
This television program is authored. So that's different. I mean, this is not, in other words, we're making it and it's done. It's going to be in a box. That's it.
That's it.
Sorry.
No, that's the way it is. I mean,
but if you've got all this stuff streaming online, people could, in theory, they could take all that stuff if you haven't copywritten it. You can make it all available to the public, and they can cut it together any way they want. They can create their own programs out of what you've done. If they understand the tools, if they understand how video editing works.
Well, that's just editing. That's editing things.
But that would be a way to make this, or put in their own narration, or get their own guests.
But wait a minute. You got a thing like the internet, which is, to me, it's a miracle. I don't know where the heck it came from. It's there, and all this kind of stuff. You got the thing. Now you got a thing that has to, in a certain way. Let's be sensible here. In a certain, it has to be the things that make that whole system work have to be, in a certain sense,
there's a certain protocol.
There have to be certain
work together.
Right, and you can't have people randomly going in and messing with the very underlying structure of the thing that will make it crash all the time.
If a human being,
you know what I'm saying?
If a human being mutates too rapidly, they won't be able to have babies with anybody else because their DNA won't even match up. So it's the same in a natural system. Even if you have a great idea, we're going to have human beings with metal hands or with great mutations. It's like you've got to do it. You've got to negotiate those. But in an open source community, the way it works is codes are developed in a collaborative fashion.
Right.
And then someone can build upon what's been done before. Or someone could go further back and say, you know, the way we do this would be better if we did it like that, and then that can be adopted into the central
That's what
kernel
I was thinking.
of the code.
There's a difference between having the ability
But
to...
there can be decision makers in that process.
There can be decision makers in that, and a certain thing. And there can be a difference between... Maybe it's a difference between power and... what's the other term? Power and influence or something. Where there's things in place, and then people can make a suggestion for a change that might be an improvement, and then that can be considered, and if it is, then that's a way of letting more people put into it.
Right, and it can
but
be
you don't want to have
by,
a sabotaging
you
capability
but you could either
by
be
somebody.
adopted by Linus Torvald, who was
He
the
came up
king
with,
of it.
from Finland?
It could be, yeah,
yeah,
it could either
Finland,
be the original, or if you really think your thing is better, then you go up with your friends and you say, okay, we're starting another system.
Okay, that's something. If you're starting another system,
then you do that,
but
and then you see.
Okay.
You know, and it's all free, so you're all entitled to do whatever you want.
Right.
I can't take Microsoft Windows and make it better with my friends because it's closed source.
Yeah, well, that's a whole system. Now, let's just help me. I'm really trying to understand,
people
because I know it's a big
People
development.
can't suggest. People can't develop. People can't do anything for it.
They can't even
locked
suggest?
up.
They can't even suggest?
No.
Is it proprietary?
Yeah.
Got a lot of these voting systems that are proprietary, Mr. Diebold and so forth.
yeah.
That's another question. Those are closed source, right? And it's proprietary. It's got to do with the laws of property and certain kinds of things about economic and intellectual property rights. That sort of thing.
Well, that's some of it, and some of it's to make it so that the people who are in charge of it can manipulate it.
Well, what about this? Help me. Let's take a minute, because other people might be wrestling with this. Mr. Picasso was pretty good during his blue period of making blue paintings, and I'm going to come in, and Mr. Picasso's painting his painting, and he's putting a thing together as a work of art and everything, and I'm going to come and say, well, that's nice, Pablo, but I think you ought to have a streak of red here. Now, that's not going to be integral.
Well,
the integrity of his painting and the integrity of his vision is going to be violated by ruthless kind of brigands or something like that. Now, how do you...
In his case, there's only one painting.
Yeah, I know.
Right. In the digital realm, you can make a copy of that and say, I'm going to improve on it like this.
Okay,
and
good.
Because he made his painting in an open source fashion, meaning he's not claiming ownership of it. He's letting it be part of the commons.
Right, and that's
you can do whatever you want
and
to
you
it.
can have the integrity, artistic integrity of that which he does, that blue period or something, whatever, a potato eater or whatever, Mr. Van Gogh or something. You can do that, but then there can be a thing over here that somebody can work on, but the integrity of that, because a lot of people aren't going to want to have an open source thing if they think it's going to violate the important overall pattern recognizing configurations of a pattern that they put together. They don't want people coming in out of ignorance and messing that up, you know? Do you understand what I'm saying?
Yeah, open source projects require the collaboration of a community with shared goals. So when an open source community decides we want to make a web browser that works better than Internet Explorer.
Right.
You know, we're going to get together and decide what are our values. What do we? How do we want this thing to work? Okay, you take that part. I'll take this part. You'll take that part.
Right.
And because we're not worried about making money off this thing, we can all collaborate and work on it together.
That's an important thing. Whether we can have a world where people are not going to be overwhelmingly concerned about making money on a thing, is that an important vision in terms of the evolution of human affairs?
I mean, you can still make money on it. I mean, in open source software, you can make money on it by, selling packages of stuff, by basically doing the shopping and collecting. So even though Linux is an open source software, I could still go and, for the service of someone creating a great install package and getting me all the stuff I need, I could pay them $30 to give me a CD that has stuff on it that's actually all public domain. I could still pay someone to give me, a Dickens book, even though Dickens is in the public domain now.
Yeah, right. Maybe everything should be in the public domain and vouchsafed in a cyber way that it's done and everything, and then new things can come. It's an important development that's evolving in terms of this open source movement. It's a good thing to be encouraged, right?
It's like any revolution against the high priests.
Right.
You know what I'm saying? We don't need the priests in order to transubstantiate Jesus' cracker into body.
Or the money changers at the temple.
Right, or the word into something I understand. I mean, that was the whole point of literacy. Here's a Torah. You can read it yourself and have your own opinion and understand the thing.
There was a priestly class, right?
There
I mean, that was
but they were basically being phased out.
That was one of the things about the Gutenberg galaxy when they started getting the Bible, and then you had the Protestant, and then along came Martin Luther. They're selling indulgences so they can bring, so that revolutionary transformation. That's sort of an open code or open source notion.
Right.
Power tends to corrupt, Mr. Acton said, and I think it's probably true and so forth. But that's an important development that's emerging now, and people should become aware of it, right? I mean, the open source, closed source argument.
I mean, it's a great, again, really what all our technology does, what the interactive space does, is it gives us new ways of looking at really old problems, and we find out that these new ways are actually old ways. That open source was not invented in the 1990s by Linus Torvalds. Open source was invented
by
Jews back in,
with that, it's an attitude. It's an attitude toward
it's an approach,
received wisdom or something from historical context.
In a sense, it's a
creative thing.
It's a path to innovation through collaboration.
Right. Okay. A very good thing to encourage.
And
you've written well on that. You've written a good deal on it.
Evolution itself is a team sport.
You do.
I've never believed in evolution as a survival of the fittest individual. It's something we kind of work out in teams.
Ashley Montague wrote on that. He used to write about how there was a lot more cooperation was beneficial to the thing, and we have to get to that sort of thing. Well, listen, we were talking, you did recently, I just happened to see it, I got in touch with you, you had a thing that was on PBS again, Frontline, right? The series, maybe you could talk a little bit about it. It was a thing called The Persuaders, and it was really well received.
Most of my work, I'll sit alone and think about the kinds of things we're talking about, I guess. Or
you do think about this kind of thing when you're alone?
This kind of stuff.
Do you have a therapist?
But I don't really... but he's done. I don't talk about those things with him either. But what my work is really, I would call it much more down to earth or descriptive.
Right.
In other words, there's I can get off on reading sort of giant evolutionary tractates and things, but the things I write about are whether and how the institutions in the world that we're living in are serving our needs to collaborate and to get on with the business of life.
Absolutely.
Or whether they're working against it.
Right.
So a book like this book on Judaism really looks at what is the modern Jewish experience. How did Judaism turn from a revolutionary idea and participation to just another religion, to another church. So I made a documentary a couple of years ago called The Merchants of Cool for PBS.
Yeah, I remember.
Youth culture and revolution and how that really got co-opted by MTV and turned into a business.
Yeah, that was great. I remember.
That was a fun one.
Yeah,
and
that
then,
was fun doing. Yeah,
and then just last week or the week before, we aired another one called The Persuaders, really looking at more adult society and looking at the desperation of advertisers and marketers to reach us any way they can.
Right.
So we looked at the problem of clutter, and how when there's so much clutter in the media space, they're going to have to find ways other than advertising to reach us, and that is really by creating really immersive experiences, by creating relationships with us, by replacing the things that we have. In other words, by creating a space like a Starbucks, a branded corporate space
where they got Wi-Fi,
rather because and to fill in, where civic society really has left us behind. And that's sort of what I've got. We got a
clip
little clip
run.
there. It sort of talks about.
Yeah, that's really great. It was like off the book "The Hidden Persuaders" by Vance Packard way back when he spoke about
and
that.
And it's supposed to be a sort of a pun on that, because in the old days it was the hidden persuaders, and now they're just the persuaders. They're not hidden anymore.
And they're ubiquitous. It's everywhere. And what the implications of that are is really important in terms of the way the society is ordered. So you brought in a minute or so clip. We'll run it a little bit here then. And this is from it. Do you happen to know where it cuts in or what's going on?
Yeah, just the part I was just talking about. In other words, the idea that advertisers are faced with this problem of clutter. There's so much, so they're going to have to find other ways sort of to create almost an environment of selling in which we live that doesn't depend on interrupting us at all.
They have this new way of doing it where they go to sell something, and rather than putting an ad out, they will walk around with a new camera, and they will walk into an environment, and they will say, I don't know, maybe it was on your piece from before, but they will go and they will say, look at this camera, will you take a picture of me? And it's to get the people involved in that process.
Guerrilla marketing.
That's called buzz, to get the buzz. Yeah, they pretend like they're a tourist. And
oh, will you take my picture?
Yeah, and then you look at the camera.
Yeah.
Is that any good? Yeah, and then what they want to do is get the buzz, which goes like
Fake
Blair
word of
Witch or
mouth.
something.
Yeah.
You know that kind. Anyway, that's just the thing. But you've got this piece now that we can show from this. And it was just aired just a month or a couple of weeks ago or something. Yeah. So we're talking with Douglas Russkoff. We're going to play a little piece now. We'll play a minute or so of this piece, and it's from the PBS series, The Persuaders, that he was the force behind creating. Okay, let's run that now then, please. Thank you.
So this is the way our world fills up with advertising. For years, I've been studying and writing about what I call the persuasion industry. I've even worked in it. But I still can't say for sure where all this is headed. Where will the advertising arms race lead? To a world made of marketing? And what would that mean for us? I set out on a tour through the modern machinery of selling to meet some of the persuaders up close. My first stop? A downtown New York storefront.
I'm not singing.
I've been invited to a hit party. Or something that looks like one. What this really is the opening salvo in a marketing blitz for a new airline. They call themselves Song. Song is a subsidiary of Delta Airlines, but you won't find any mention of Delta here. Delta is old-fashioned air travel, and Song is their way of persuading us that they can compete with hip, low-cost carriers like JetBlue.
A lot of people ask us, you got to be crazy. You're starting an airline in the worst environment in the U.S., in the history of U.S. commercial aviation. And we were, and we are.
That process gets more and more complex.
Delta broke off a team of their best marketers and told them to start from scratch.
What's the kind of the creative idea that runs through each of these?
The first thing the Song team decided was that it wasn't enough just to launch a new airline. To get our attention, they had to invent a new culture around flying.
Which is to sort of capture consumers' imagination by...
But how do you do that?
Talk to me a little bit about why you chose the things you did, and...
Song started with a trusted tool, the focus group.
The homework was choose images, words, things that capture what might be your ideal experience of traveling by air.
Before long, Song's research yielded a nugget. There was a large group of flyers whose needs and desires were being ignored. Women.
The food, I think they could improve a lot.
It was an incredible insight to say that this could be the first airline that had, a real, understanding, much deeper understanding of women and women's interests.
The Song team created a detailed profile of their target consumer and even gave her a name, Carrie.
She's got 3 children, a husband. They both work. They have an SUV and a sports car, Neiman Marcus credit cards, but she shops at Target. She has got a propensity to read kind of high-end literature, but she finds guilty pleasure in People magazine, and she doesn't have an airline.
Here's our organic menus.
Song would have low fares, organic food, and more entertainment options, but most importantly, it would forge a real connection with women.
That's what they're gonna look like. Excellent.
To pull that off, Song turned to a pro, Andy Spade. Spade is the co-creator of the Kate Spade Company, a multi-million-dollar line of fashion accessories that caters to women like Carrie.
I think early on when you're shaping a new brand, you need those brand visionaries. He's got a gift, and he's had it from the very first time we started working with him, and that's why we love him so much.
What are they going to do in this day?
He gets us more than we get ourselves.
Like the 8-track player and this TV. I bring ideas, kind of visualize ideas that companies have and give them kind of a substance and a texture and a life that they may not know how to create. And I bring that, I take their idea or their point of view, and I try to create this make it into something that's bigger, maybe emotional, maybe optimistic, maybe classical, maybe, happy.
See, on this level, these people look really silly.
Yeah.
Spades, Andy Spade going, happy this.
Yeah.
But the odd thing is their goal is rather than selling through commercials, they want to create an entire culture.
Environment, yeah.
A culture. In other words, that women will want to belong to Song Airlines culture.
Right.
They're trying to tap this, almost the whatever weakness, sadness, emptiness, isolation they can find. Oh, you're a woman. These are your values. We understand you. And it's like, no, wait a minute. This is an airline. We're talking about getting you from New York to Florida to see your grandmother and back. Yet they think that the way, and it turns out it's true to a certain extent, that the way to reach people is to do all of these focus groups, all of this research. They put people in rooms and hypnotize them and get to their childhood experiences of planes so they can create, commercials and seats and airlines and colors that appeal to this almost this
Olympic
subconscious
system.
longing.
Right, from the reptilian core on down and everything. And they will raid all of the psychology departments to understand the language and of emotion and the kind of things that will motivate people. And they're coming to understand it better and better all the time, and they're getting to be real masters at it.
And what we looked at in here was that, on the one hand, these people are clowns, and we have this, we interviewed this French guy, Clotaire Rapaille, who believes that everyone makes all their choices from the reptile brain. He goes, the reptile always wins. So I'm asking him, well, if the reptile
that's the guy
always
that,
wins, then how do we get marriage? How do we get civilization? Reptiles don't do that.
How about the neocortex?
Exactly.
A little of that.
So neocortex has won a couple of times.
Right.
But no, the reptile, because why? They want to use really what they're doing is the oldest selling systems. What their techniques really work on is advertisers. They're selling their techniques to a new crop of advertisers.
Right. Is there a difference between advertising and public relations? Let's say public relations or public education. People would say you're educating people to that, or to political campaigns. They're going to be able to figure out, and they try to figure. That's the biggest ad campaign of the whole ball game. It seems running for the president. We just came through one, and they're going to try and test that whatever they can do in order to try and brand their person as one that can tap into the emotional needs of those people rather necessarily than all the carefully thought out rational explanations.
Absolutely. I mean, that's what the show is really about, finally, is what happens when you take the techniques of marketing and translate them to the arena of politics. So what we did was look at what happens when you market to people. When you market to people, you market to them as individuals. We're talking so much about collaboration and evolution as a team sport. Well, marketing is about you. You're alone. You need one for yourself because you deserve it. So what happens when that decision-making, that reptilian Coke or Pepsi decision is now turned to Bush or Kerry?
Right. Flight or fright.
Right. What you've done, fight or flight.
Yeah.
What you've done, though, is reduced an important decision that should involve cognition. Now you've reduced it down as much as possible to an animal impulsive decision. And when you bring people down to impulsive animal decisions, they're going to make decisions based on fear and security and
well, you notice it may have worked because, and that fellow was a great marketer. He sought out by people all over the world. That fellow you had in the
Frank
thing.
Luntz.
No, not Frank Luntz. It's the guy who lived in a castle somewhere.
Rapaille.
That's the guy you were talking about. I mean, he gets the. They go to him because he does. And look, we just had an election where a good deal of it was based upon tapping into that basic level of reptilian core fear.
The good guys wonder,
how come
when we go back next time, should we do that? And I would argue no. I would argue in the end you're only as good as your tactics. And if your tactics are based on devaluing and degrading the conversation
or the neocortex.
Exactly. If you are, I mean, I think there are ways to appeal to more than one level at a time.
Let's hope. We should be. We should be sophisticated enough to be able to do that.
You would think, but and that's what the Jews tried to do. In other words, let's create a myth that self-destructs. If people need a myth in order to vote for someone, if they need an image, let's create an image, but an image that isn't as disempowering. Let's create an image that doesn't require regression and transference.
And let's create an image that requires this cooperative kind of attitude that the open source kind of represents in a way.
If you're going to cooperate and live in an open source reality where we're working together towards goals, then we can no longer believe that there is a daddy taking care of us. If we're going to be in charge of the world, which is what an open source reality would be about, then we need to give up the idea that there is a daddy George Bush or a king or a pope who really knows what's going on, and accept the fact that we really are in charge of what's going on. But if people aren't ready to take responsibility for the world they're living in, then what we're saying is, and we've got to accept it then and move on with that, we need a benevolent dictator.
Haven't we always had benevolent dictators throughout the whole of the human society? We always had the emperor, the emperors in Rome. We had the Aristotle said there were only a few people that were in charge, Pericles and so forth, and all throughout the whole human history, we've always had this kind of a situation. So, what is there different, young man, about now? There's something in the Seder where they say, what makes this day different than another? What makes this time different? And the obverse side of that destructive scenario that is part of the pattern that we've evolved from out of history might be, as Bucky Fuller and some others, Burry Bookchin have said, we may be actually collectively, with our technological capability of providing life support for all of the human society and for within an ecological context, coming to a point where we are in a certain sense having more haves and have-nots. We may be transcending scarcity as an ontologic reality, which would make it safe for there to be an environment of free association and so forth. Do you think there's anything to be said for the obverse side to the destructive scenario, that we may be transcending scarcity?
We began having transcended scarcity. We began with great abundance.
Where? In Eden? You think we had abundance in Eden?
Oh, I think we had abundance, period. And I think we developed scarcity as a way of perpetuating an economic model that allowed for certain people to have power over other people.
Maybe. You think so,
yeah.
really? So when we were wandering,
abundance has been repressed. Abundance can be reborn.
That's interesting. Talking about
and what do we need?
Renaissance.
What do we need using the model of scarcity? What do we need to convince ourselves that we have abundance? There'll never be enough. That's why we're going to go obese. We'll never feel that there's enough until we accept abundance as something else. Abundance is an approach towards living.
Perhaps so, yeah, and there's a philosophical component to that, but I mean, if you examine that, but I don't think it's possible to say that when we were running away from leopards on the Serengeti plain and scavenging for food and so forth, that we were living in a condition of abundance in a certain kind of sense, much less a knowledge of the system of which we're a part at a high level. We've come out of an all-at-once association with the environment. We're closing, but now we have knowledge and we're learning revolutions in every field. We're coming into some, not only materially, but also in an intellectual sense. Do you understand what I'm saying? Maybe?
Yeah, but if you look at the totality of the population, it'd be interesting to try to compute, is there a greater percentage of people starving to death today, or back in your a hunter-gatherer.
Well, there's more of them. There's more of them.
There's more of them. It has to. I mean, I think it's probably more fair to find out if it's a greater percentage or not.
The first thing to begin would be is to have a place where it can be brought up. What is it that makes this different, if anything, that makes it possible to make the open source world possible at the same time that we're trying to build through good ethical concerns and so forth, an open source notion of how we can cooperate with one another. The two could go together.
Right, and I don't think that we can look at it as a major shift from one culture to the open source culture, or it will never ever happen.
Oh, I see. Yeah, okay.
I think what we have to do instead is just help people, and that's what all my books and all the documentaries are about.
Acts of random kindness.
Slowly show people that thinking for themselves isn't that scary.
Okay, listen. Well, you've done a great job with your students and with the public in general in doing that, and thanks, Jug. I'm really happy to talk with you again and coming in. Douglas Rushkoff, professor, I guess, at NYU, teaching media. What is it?
Interactive media
theory, and you have the Interactive Media Center down there. Was Red Burns associated with it?
With Red Burns, yeah.
Yeah, Red Burns and George Stoney was involved with that too in the early stages and everything. Happy to present those perceptions. We invite you to, and we'll come back again tomorrow. Thanks a lot, Douglas, for coming in and for all your work. I really do appreciate it, and all the best to you and your wife as you approach this major event of having welcoming your first son or daughter into the larger mix. Please tune in. We'll come back tomorrow. Thanks again for coming in, Joe.
Talk about Armageddon.
Yes. Right.
There are no distinct points of change.
Right. As Armageddon descends.
Day before, maybe a day after.
Yeah. Right. That is a major event. That's a metaphor. Maybe the birthing metaphor. It might be because maybe it's the birth. I don't know. Maybe it is. But I just have a sense that, boy, I'll tell you, it's because everything's moving so fast now.
Yeah,
it really is. But, moving to molecular computing.
George Bush and his side are using Armageddon and markers.
Absolutely.
We're coming to this thing,
Reptilian
and this is going to come, and things are going to come.
Oh, yeah.
And that's why I'm thinking, if we are going to be open source, we need to be more process-oriented about it.
Yeah, right. A little less. Yeah, I see what you mean. Rather than letting them manipulate it.
Right.
Yeah,
this is the way it's always been.
Right.
Human beings have been working.